Welcome. Thank you for coming out. I'd just like to ask people if they don't mind to turn off their phones. As I mentioned last week also, the shir now runs from 10:20 to 11:20, and there's a short break before the next session. I'd also like to announce that the shir is sponsored today by Hallie Frist, who has sponsored the learning for all of today in memory of her late father. It's his 10th Yortzeit, Eliezer ben Moshe Aaron, Alav Shalom. Should be an aliyah for the neshama, and very grateful for that sponsorship. So we are in the middle of a series which I don't propose to keep with for that much longer. I think we need to turn our mind to other things as well. Even though the war goes on, we need to think towards Purim, and then we need to think towards Pesach. But we have a little way to go. And I promised you last week that we would talk a little bit today about Amalek. We are in the run-up to Shabbos Zohar and Parshas Zohar. We need to get a little bit of an understanding as to what Amalek is, hashkafically, halachically, how that works. Before I start, is it going to be too warm in here? I already feel that it's going to be too warm in here. Is that because the heating's on? Okay, can I open a window? Okay. No, I mean, that's fine. Okay, so as I'm sure we're all aware, the issue of Amalek is one which some people prefer not to look at too closely because it's great sometimes on our 21st century ears, although it's not always clear whether everybody agrees that we still live in the 21st century from the way that we see people acting. But nevertheless, we have ethical sensibilities, and Amalek is often a challenge to those. And maybe this is an opportunity to get a deeper understanding and appreciation of the mitzvah. And I brought you at the top of the sheet a pasuk from Tehillim, as lo eivosh be'beitei it's called mitzvah. I'm not going to be embarrassed by the mitzvot. If I don't understand a mitzvah, if a mitzvah bothers me, concerns me, we should take that as an opportunity and a challenge to look more deeply at it. Now, as I'm sure we're also aware, the issue of Amalek has been one which has been used cynically by people who are enemies of Israel to accuse Israel of all sorts of things that you and I know, and I won't even justify the accusation by denying it or arguing in detail against it, because we know our soldiers and we know what they do and we know how they act, and Baruch Hashem, we're enormously proud of them and the way that they conduct their operations. But when Bibi Netanyahu mentioned Amalek as part of his approach to trying to encourage the soldiers to go forth to fight a war which is a difficult war against a brutal enemy, this blew up in his face, and people said, you're encouraging the Jewish people to commit genocide, etc., etc. I don't need to recite all of the things that were said. Now, there are many, many reasons why that whole concept is nonsense in the way that they said it, not just because we know and we're proud of the ethical way in which our army acts, but when we actually analyze what Amalek is and how it works, we'll realize that it's not what people often think it to be. And this is an important part of our analysis for today, as to see, how have the halachic poskim and the hashkafic mefarshim understood this. Now, in terms of the ethics of war, many of the ethics of war actually are founded in mitzvot in the Chumash. And I've listed a few of them here. The idea that the Jewish people should know that their success in war is not theirs. They're not just fighting their own battles, but they're not because they're not superior to anywhere else. The Torah is very clear that the reason that you're fighting against the Canaanim and that you will win against the Canaanim is not because you're better, but it's because they're worse. Meaning you can't congratulate yourself. You're fighting for something which is morality, and they have fallen short of that. The mitzvah to offer peace before a battle, which we'll see in a minute. The mitzvah not to destroy more than is necessary in a battle, which we extend into the whole idea of Bal Tashchit. The mitzvah to maintain kedusha in the battle camp, both sexually, use of the bathroom, which is part of my whole book on tzniut. Starts off with that idea, which is a very foundational idea. The mitzvah of proper treatment of civilians in war, especially women in war, the Eshet Yifat Torah, meaning the Torah lays out morality and ethics in war, which are light years ahead of what was said and done at the time. And in light of all of that, it makes Amalek all the more perhaps surprising. And I want to start with a voice from Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. There are two voices, actually, that I personally am missing right now in the whole battle that the Jewish people is fighting. One is the voice of Rav Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, who I can't claim to have been a close Talmud of, and I was never in the Gush Yeshiva. I live in Alon Shvut, and I met Rav Lichtenstein a few times, but I feel that his voice would have been a very powerful and important one. And the other one, which I miss personally much more, is the voice of Rabbi Sachs. I wish that we had Rabbi Sachs speaking his wisdom on what's going on at the moment, and in his absence we have to try and work out what he would have said, which I'm not going to get into today, but I just say not only do I miss him as an individual still very much, but right now his voice would have been enormously powerful on this. But let's start with Rav Lichtenstein, because Rav Lichtenstein raised the issue of Amalek in number one. Regarding certain particular Tzivuyim, divine commands. Surely we find instances in which obedient response to God's normative demands stands in apparent opposition to what we conceive to be good. This, of course, frames the whole question. How do we know what's good? How do we know what's right? Is by definition what the Torah says ethical, or is there a standard of ethics which the Torah is trying to get us to achieve, which actually exists in some way independent of the Torah? So we'll see how that works. Remember when Abraham says to Hashem, "Hashofit kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat," he's challenging us on this very issue, which is, God, you said this is going to happen, but that can't be, because there is a standard of mishpat which you would not depart from, which implies something external to what God says. So we'll talk about that. And if you will, to what we understand God conceives to be good. Here a problem arises. How do we relate to this? What makes the problem more acute is the fact that it arises particularly in individuals who are morally and spiritually sensitive. Those who are relatively coarse are not concerned with these issues. Who is troubled by the command to wipe out Amalek? Those people who have succeeded in developing the kind of moral sensitivity that is important to us. So Rav Lichtenstein is telling us, if you feel bothered by this, then good. That's not a problem. You should feel bothered by this, and it should be an opportunity for you to understand it better. So let's start off with a little tour around how we meet Amalek. Many of these sources are well known. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because I want to kind of focus on other things. As we know, Amalek is the grandson of Esav. Let's have a quick look at number 2. So we see right at the end of Parshas Vayishlach, Ve'ele told us Esav Avi Edom Bahar Seir, and we see all of the Toldos of Esav and the names of the children of Esav. Now, one of the children of Esav is Eliphaz, and later on we see all of the lords of Seir, or the non-Jewish Edomite, or not Edomite, pre-Edomite kings in that area. And one of the princesses in that non-Jewish court is Timnah. So we see Timnah, if you look at Yud Bet, Timnah haita Pilegesh li Eliphaz. And we see that Timnah became a Pilegesh, a concubine. By the way, we had a whole series of shirim on what is a Pilegesh. I don't know if you remember all the things we did. Maybe I should kind of just start from the beginning again and go do another 6 years, the same things that we did. But we had a whole series on Pilegesh. What is Pilegesh? It's all on the website. So she wanted to be the Pilegesh of Eliphaz, ben Esav. V'teilid le Eliphaz ad Amalek. And she gave birth to Amalek, Ele b'nei Adar Eshet Esav. And this is the Toldos of Esav. Now, who was this Timnah woman? The Chumash also tells us that she was the sister of Lotan. Okay, very seems like obscure genealogy. So if you go to the top of page 2, the Gemara has something very interesting to say. Achot Lotan Timnah. The Pasuk says that Timnah was the sister of Lotan, non-Jews. Maihi. What is all this about, says the Gemara? Who is this Timnah woman? Timnah bat Malachim have. Timnah was the mother of Amalek. She was also a princess. Dichsiv aluf Lotan, aluf Timnah. She had her own aluf. She had her own royal part of the family. V'chol aluf, and whenever it says the Gemara, it says aluf. Malchusa beloi tagahi. This is a royal family, just without a crown. It's just a duke or a count or whatever it is. It's not technically a melech, but this is a royal family. Da boile iguire. She wanted to convert to Judaism. This woman saw Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and she said, I want to leave my non-Jewish family, and I want to join this Jewish family, or proto-Jewish family. Ba'asa etzel Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov. She came to the family of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, v'lo kiblua, and they weren't interested. Pushed her away. Halcha v'haitza pelegish le'Elifaz ben Esav. So she became a pelegish. She became a concubine for Esav, so that she could, for Eliphaz, so she could in some way be connected with the family. Amra, because she said, Mutav tehei shifcha le'umazo, I would rather be a shifcha, a servant, a lowly pilegesh in this special family, v'lo tehei gvira le'uma acheres, and I'd rather be that than a princess in the family that I came from. So what happened? Nafak mina Amalek. Out from that situation came Amalek, the Tzairinu Yisrael, who became the great enemy of Klal Yisrael. My timer, what's the reason? As if you didn't get it already, the Gemara wants to emphasize, the loy iboy leila rachaka. They shouldn't have pushed her away. They pushed her away too much. Okay, when a ger comes to become Jewish, then we ask them, what are you thinking about? Why would you want to be Jewish? What's wrong with you? Keep Sheva mitzvahs. Go to Olam Haba. Be happy. Why do you need to become Jewish? But there's a certain point at which we should accept Gerim, and we should recognize the sincerity of their wish to join the Jewish people. And because we pushed away Timnah, we ended up with Amalek. This is a very, very strong chazal, which is saying that the whole of the concept of Amalek comes out of our lack of sensitivity to welcome people to the Jewish people who were not originally part of the Jewish people. So I think that's actually a very interesting chazal. He says, before you get too fixated on destroying Amalek, just understand that you created your own enemy. Very, very interesting chazal. I think the heating is on. They're turning it down. Yes, sorry? Chazal, this is a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Okay, again, when Chazal are telling us Midrashim, this is a bigger share. This is not an account of something that happened in Mesopotamia in 2000 BCE. This is a story that Chazal create to communicate a very important philosophical, theological, hashkafic message. That's what Midrash is. You have to take Midrash very seriously. Sometimes if you take it literally, you're not taking it seriously. So I'm not interested in whether this happened as a historical event. Maybe it did. I'm not saying it didn't. I'm interested in the fact that Chazal wants us to take this message away, that don't push away non-Jews when they want to come to Geirus, to the point that you actually create your own enemy. I need to just go on a little bit because we've got a lot to do. So just wanted to bring that at the beginning. Now, the first contact with Amalek, of course, is the battle with Yoshua. There are a few important points to bring out on this as well. Let's quickly read these psukim. We're not going to read all of the psukim, especially when we get to Shmuel Aleph, but we'll look at these ones. Vayikra Shem Hamakom Masa Umariva. They'd come out of Masa Umariva because they were arguing with each other. The Jewish people were arguing. Al Riv B'nai Yisrael, because they were fighting with each other. Va'al Nasoitam et Hashem, and they were testing Hashem. Leimor, and they were saying, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im'ayim. Is God still with us or not? This is the group of people who had just come out of Mitzrayim. And yet, a very short time after they came out of Mitzrayim, they were saying, do we still have hashgacha? Is God still with us or not? Because of that, immediately Amalek comes. And by the way, Rashi points out in Devarim, where we see Amalek again, we'll see in a minute, what is the parsha immediately before Amalek in Devarim? It's the parsha of someone who has false weights and measures. Because they also say, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im'ayin, meaning, I don't know if God really runs the world and is going to give me the money that I need. I think I need to make a little bit on the side. I'll have false weights and false measures. It's the same idea of a lack of emunah, a lack of bitachon, that God is not really there. God is not really with us. Vayavo Amalek, and then Amalek came, v'ilachem in Yisrael b'Refidim, and they came to Yisrael in Refidim, right at the end of the shir. We'll see, if we get that far, that some of the Hasidic masters wanted to take this word Refidim and read in it Raf Yadayim. We'll see what that means if we get that far at the end of the shir. V'yom Moshe el Yoshua. So Moshe says to Yoshua, B'chal lanu anashim. Okay, no miracles this time, which is very interesting, because he could have just, said, fine, we've just had Esamakas, we've just had Kriyas Yamsuf, so God will strike them down. No, that's not how it works. You've got to call up the army. We need a Tzav Shmona, and we need to get everybody out there. B'chal lanu anashim, v'yitzi lachem ba'Amalek, and we have to go out and fight them machar tomorrow. Anochi nitzav al rosh hagiv'ah, u'matei Elohim b'yadi, and I'm going to hold the staff of God. V'yas Yeshua ka'asher amalo Moshe le'lechim ba'Amalek, u'Moshe v'Aaron v'chor alu b'rosh hagivah. Again, I'm going to go quite quickly because I'm sure you're familiar with this. V'haya ka'asher yarim Moshe yado, when Moshe's hands were high, u'gvar Yisrael, and the Jewish people were successful, u'ka'asher yanich yado, u'gvar Amalek. And as his hands went down, then Amalek started to win. And there's a very beautiful Ramban, which I didn't bring you here, who says that why were his hands going down? What's wrong? So the Ramban explains that the people who were not fighting were also mirroring Moshe. And when Moshe's hands were high in the air, so the people's hands were high in the air, but something, keeping your hands high in the air for a long time is very difficult. So after a while, okay, there's a war on, but all right, whatever. I'm not going to say Tehillim anymore, and enough already with Avinu Malkeinu. It's very difficult. Their hands went down. As their hands went down, his hands went down, because they were supporting him. Their support for him was propping up his support for the army, meaning it's a joint effort. And it's very difficult. I'm sure we all feel this, meaning we've been doing this for a long time now. And it's difficult to keep that sense of momentum, but it's critical, because when our hands go down, then Moshe's hands go down, and the leaders become dispirited, and then the army becomes dispirited, and the whole thing becomes a cycle. So that's coming up right now. V'yidei Moshe k'feidim, after a while they realized that something needed to be done. V'yikro Evan, they took a stone, v'yisimu tachtav, v'yeshiv alav v'Aaron v'chor tamchu b'yadav. And Aaron and Chor held up his hands. Mizeh echad, mizeh echad. V'hi yadav emunah, and his hands were emunah ad bo hashemesh. By the way, the word emunah is very interesting. If you want to know what is emunah, emunah is not faith. That is a very non-Jewish translation. Emunah is faithfulness. Meaning his hands were faithful. They did what they were meant to do. That's what it means, emunah. So the idea of emunah in Judaism is not just like, I believe something, I have faith, even though it doesn't make any sense. Lehefech, on the contrary, you're meant to try and work out to the best of your ability why God exists, how God exists. You're meant to try and get your head around that. Rabbi Bachya said, somebody who has a brain, who doesn't try and work out the implications or the understanding of the existence of God, is like someone who has a disease, who's a doctor, who refuses to cure himself because he won't self-medicate. Do yourself a favor. If you know what's wrong with you, take the pills. So he says, if you have a brain, you have to use a brain. That's not emunah. Emunah means, now you've worked it out, are you prepared to kind of live with it and live up to it? Are you prepared to do what it takes to live up to the reality that you worked out with your brain? That's very difficult. We know our hands have to be up. It's very hard to keep them up. Okay. V'chalosh Yeshua et Amalek, and Yeshua weakened Amalek. Did not destroy, did not defeat Amalek. Vet amo lefi charev, and he put them to the sword. V'yomer Hashem Moshe, ksov zot zikaron b'sefer, put this now down in a book. By the way, I brought you in a footnote. This is the first time in Tanakh that we see anything referred to as written down. It's an astounding thought. In the whole of Sefer Bereshis, nobody ever writes anything down. This is the first time you have writing, which is fascinating. You can debate whether this is around about the same time as the alphabet was being developed as well by the Phoenicians. I'm not getting into that right now. Write this down. V'simba aznei Yeshua, and also have an oral law tradition with Yeshua. Ki macha emcha et zecha Amalek. Who's going to destroy Amalek? God. God's going to destroy Amalek. Mitachat hashamayim. That's God's plan. He will wipe out Amalek. V'yivin Moshe mizbeach. Moshe brings a mizbeach, builds a mizbeach. V'yikra shmo, and he calls it Hashem Nisi. God is my banner. Meaning, what is my flag that I'm taking into war with me? It has to be my connection with God. V'yomer, and he said, Kiyad akeis ka, that the hand is on the throne of God. Milchama la Hashem, it is a war of God or for God. But Amalek against Amalek, midor dor. Each generation to each generation. Now, the reason I read these psukim in detail is because a lot of the things that we're going to see for the rest of this year come out of those psukim. Even though I'm sure you knew it, this, of course, is the laning for Purim. This is what we lane on Purim morning. It's just a little snippet. It's one of the only lanings that we lane 9 psukim rather than 10 psukim, because this is a whole parsha. But this is Amalek. So let's have a look at what the Abarbanel says. The Abarbanel says, so why is Amalek different from anybody else? Okay, we fought these ones. We fought the Midyanim. We fought the Moavim. We fought lots of people. Why is Amalek singled out for a different treatment? Says the Abarbanel, Aval Amalek lo haya lo siba mizeh b'milchamto. Amalek had no reason to fight. There was no purpose to it. It was just destructive. Kihina Yisrael lo hayu ovrim ba'artzo. God, the Jewish people were not going to cross Amalek's land. Ubaim lehilachem bo, and they weren't coming to fight against him, such that he had to fight against them. Who asked you to get involved? Everything was fine. There was a ceasefire before you started this. V'gam lo haya lehem artzot. He didn't have any specific land. Sheyelech Amalek lekavsham, or the Jewish people didn't have a land that Amalek wanted to conquer. Ulechem daso, and out of desire for that land, ulechem daso atam yilachem bam. That's why people fight wars. They fight wars because they need to conquer land or because they've been attacked. Aval haita levad milchamto bederech seitzam Mitzrayim. He just fought them because they came out of Mitzrayim. They're on the way to get the Torah. Rotza lomar shehu yatsa lesatan lehem bederech. He just came as a satan. I don't have any goals. I just want to destroy you. I have no interest. I have nothing to gain from this. It's actually, I'm going to actually commit national suicide. I don't care. As long as I can destroy you, that's all that matters. Oiver, he comes out, umithaber al riv lo lo. And he gets involved in an argument, in a battle that's it's nothing to do with him. That's what defines Amalek, and we'll see when we get to Rav Soloveitchik as we come later. We're going to have a problem because we're going to have a very clear halachic principle that all the nations of the world from that time of history are no longer identifiable. There are no Canaanim and Moavim and Midyanim and Ammonim. So there are no more Amalekim. We don't know who's an Amaleki. And yet, halachically, we have a mitzvah to continue fighting the Amalekim door. So how are we going to do that? How does that work? We'll see Rav Soloveitchik comes in on that issue. Okay, fine. We'll just skip Bilam at the moment. Bilam talks about Amalek when he prophesies at the end of his prophecies in Parshas Balak there, and he talks about how Amalek was the first nation to attack the Jewish people, and they will be destroyed at the end of the process. Parshas Zachor, in number 7, Zachor is Asher Asa Lecha Amalek b'derech b'seischem Mitzrayim, Asher korcha b'derech, and here we'll see some quite shaking ideas coming out of this. How do we describe this war? Asher korcha, lashon keri, we'll see what that means, b'derech, v'yizanev b'cha. It's an unusual word. V'yizanev b'cha. He tailed you. A zanav is a tail. He cut off the tail. Kol shalim acharecha. And he focused and he focused on and attacked the people who were the least able to defend themselves, the weak. V'ata ayef v'yageya, when you were weak, v'lo yara Elohim. And either he didn't fear God or you didn't fear God. There was a reason for this. And these are very important talking for us. When God has brought you to the land, when we've left you, given you rest, mikol oivecha, from all other enemies misaviv around you, be'eretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha, in the land that God is giving you, as a nachala, l'rishtah, to inherit the land, timcha etzecha Amalek. Now we flipped from being God's battle, now this becomes your battle. Timcha etzecha Amalek, mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. Don't forget. So again, we have an ambiguity. Who's going to fight Amalek? Is it God's battle? Is it our battle? Can we only do it once we've fought everybody else? Do we have to do it now? There's a lot of lack of clarity in what's going on with Amalek that the poskim are going to put together. I just brought you Rashi, number 8, which I found, I've read many, many times, but now I find particularly striking and disturbing. If you see what Rashi says here, Korcha b'derech in number 8, he quotes Chazal, Loshen keri v'tuma. Korcha is a language of tuma, of impurity. Shahaya mit'am'an, that not only did he kill Amalek didn't just kill people, but he defiled them. But mishkav zachar, he engaged in male rape. Now, I don't think this is intended to exclude regular rape, which was tragically part of warfare and still is to some degree, meaning that's almost taken for granted that a brutal enemy would do such a terrible thing to the women. But they even raped the men. That's something that normal armies didn't do. This is Amalek. They did something that no human being would do. V'zanav b'cha, makat zanav, and Rashi picks on this word zanav, chotech milot. They actually mutilated Amalek, sexually mutilated the people, v'zorke klapimala, and threw their organs into the sky. We've read this a million times and we think, how do we even relate to that? How do we even understand that? And the way that the Torah describes the way that Amalek fought, they were just not like a regular army. These are the kind of things that they did, and that's what Rashi's quoting is coming out of the Pasuk. Rav Hirsch, I'm not going to read Rav Hirsch, you can read it on your own, again says that the Amalek had no need to fight. There was a completely different motivation. You can read that on your own. The battle of Shaul against Amalek, which is very important, which I'm not going to read the psukim in number 10 because I want to get into the definition of what the mitzvah is. But as you probably already know, Shaul was commanded to fight against the Amalekim and to wipe them all out. Let me just bring you one pasuk in the middle, which is underlined. Lo tachmol alav. Okay, do not have pity on them. Va'amesa me'ish va'ad isha, with man or a woman. Mo'olel va'ad yonek, even the children. Mishor va'ad seh, even the animals. Bigamal va'ad chamor, even the donkeys, etc. And Shaul didn't do this. Obviously, he saved Agag, and he saved the animals, etc. And you had the whole confrontation between Shmuel and Shaul. And we'll see soon Rav Lichtenstein picks up on this and says why it's so important that when he didn't complete what God told him to do, it showed that his motivation in killing Amalek had been improper, which retroactively turned the whole thing into murder, or at least an improper use of power against Amalek. We'll see Rav Lichtenstein has some very powerful things to say about that. I've listed to you at the bottom of page 3 the other battles in Tanakh against Amalek. It wasn't just in the Chumash. We meet Amalek again in Shoftim with Moab, and in Shoftim later with Midian. Shmuel we just talked about here, but later on David also attacks Amalek. Later on Amalek burns down Siklag and takes the women and children hostage. And they have to deal with a whole hostage release situation, which we talked about when we talked about the hostages. King Shaul is killed by Amaleki. The tribe of Shimon, right at the end of Tanakh, goes to war against Amalek somewhat more successfully. And of course, then we see Haman Ha'agagi, who Chazal say is descended from Agag. And again, the lady who asked, like, how do we know? What does this midrash mean? Again, the point here is not necessarily that he was genealogically descended from Agag. Maybe he was. But the point is that he was spiritually descended from Agag. He took over what is the Amaleki way, which is his attitude to the Jewish people was, I don't care what the cost is, we just have to destroy the Jews. That was Haman's attitude. Now, let's get into the Meforshim. So far, I think you've probably heard all of this in different scenarios before, but let's look at how the different Meforshim define the mitzvah. So, first of all, the Malbim. The Malbim, if you like, deals with the issue of Amalek by saying, God has to fight Amalek. At the end of the day, it's not your fight. It's God's fight. And therefore, you're not meant to be actively involved in the same way in destroying Amalek. God will make sure that happens. Look at what he says, number 11. Apart from the fact that we have a mitzvah of fighting against Amalek, Al Mastemat Olam, for the hatred that Amalek has, Al Yisrael, for the Jewish people. Yavo Eid, there will come a time, Hashem Yitbarach Shemo, Ba'atzmo Yimched Shemo. Okay, then Hashem will wipe out Amalek. Neged Mashahaya Magamasol Anaz Hashem, because Amalek had this fight against God. The Neged Masha Nilcham Im Hashem, Macha Emcha Et Zeich Amalek. That's what the Pesukim say in Shmot. Macha Emcha, I will wipe out the Zeich of Amalek. Yavo Eitz, there will come a time, says the Malbim, La'atzid Lavo She'ani Ba'atzmi Emcha Et Zeich Amalek. So the Malbim, if you like, when we ask the question, well, how are we meant to be fighting Amalek today? The Malbim says, not your fight. You have to be aware. You have to remember. I'm really warm. Are you really warm? Is it just me? It's not just me. The heating has to be on. Can we ask them to turn the heating off? Or can we ask them to turn the air conditioning on a little bit? Because, if we'll just turn the heat off. Not everybody's hot. Okay, just me. Okay, fine. Don't turn the air conditioning on. Okay, just turn the heat off. Compromise. Okay, fine. Maybe it's just me. I'm working hard. Okay, fine. Okay, so the Malbim deals with that by saying it's God's fight. Look at the Smag. Go over the page to page 4. Page 4, the Smag says as follows. Kashem shenimcha shiva ta'amimim. Just like we were commanded to wipe out the 7 nations. We were commanded to wipe out Amalek. And there's a positive mitzvah. Mitzvah zo eino noheget ela liyemos melech HaMashiach. The Smag says, you know something? Your job, our job is to remember, and when Mashiach comes, he'll deal with Amalek. La'achar kibush haaretz, after we've already conquered Eretz Yisrael, Shenema, as it says, V'haya behedich Hashem lokecha lacha mikol oivecha, timcha et zecha Amalek. Yes, the mitzvah's on you, but the mitzvah's not on you today. The mitzvah's on you when Mashiach has come. So that's the position of the Smag. The position of the Uraim is that the mitzvah is only on a melech. Which raises an interesting question, is do we have a melech or do we not have a melech? And we talked a little bit about this last week, which is it could be the state of Israel is considered to be a melech, in which case then this mitzvah would still apply or would again apply. But let's look at the chinuch in a little bit more detail, because the chinuch actually differentiates. Look in the Sefer Chinuch number 14. We are commanded to destroy the descendants of Amalek, and to destroy, to wipe them out from the world. Zachar nekeveh gadol v'katan. It sounds like everybody. Va'al zeh ne'ema timcha et zecha Amalek. Shebichlal zecha hu hakol. Zecha includes everything. You have to remember what has to be done. V'zot min hamitzvot hamutaled al hatzibur kulam. So first of all, he says this is a mitzvah not on individuals. This is a mitzvah on the nation. No individual, at least at this part of the mitzvah, has this mitzvah to wipe out Amalek. There are 3 mitzvahs given to the Jewish people when they came in the land. Okay, to appoint a king, and to destroy Amalek. So what do you and I have to do? Kol yachid Yisrael has charim on all Jewish males. There is a mitzvah. Mutal hachiyav lahargom laabdam min ha'olam im yesh koach biyadam. If you know what you're doing and you have the ability to do it as an individual, and you know who the Amalekim are, we'll see that in a minute. There's this whole story about the Vilna Gaon who killed an Amaleki in the mikvah. I don't know if that's true or it's not true. There's a whole story there. How he exactly knew he was an Amaleki, but that's a whole different thing. I'm not sure if that's a reputable story. But he divides the mitzvah into 2. He says there is a mitzvah on the nation to fight against the nation of Amalek, and there's a mitzvah on the individual if you happen to have the ability and you're a man and you know who the Amalekim are, then you have to do that. Okay? So the question, of course, remains, how do we know who is an Amaleki? And I couldn't help but bring the story in number 16 from Rav Gustman. Rav Gustman, who was in the Holocaust, and he reports as follows. When Rav Gustman reached the forest, his plan was to become a partisan to fight against the Nazis and defend himself and his family. However, to be accepted as a partisan, there was a single condition. One had to bring a weapon. Rav Gustman's opportunity came when he saw a lone Nazi soldier passing through a quiet place in the forest. Rav Gustman jumped the soldier, threw his rifle as far away as he could, and killed the soldier with his bare hands. In Yerushalayim, Rav Gustman would look down at his hands and say, I was Mekayim the mitzvah of being Moiche Zeicher Amalek. I fulfilled the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek with my bare hands. Interesting. Very powerful story of how Rav Gustman felt that was what he was doing. But again, there was no hesitation in the way that the Jewish people understood that the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, were part of what Amalek was. And his fight against Amalek was part of that fight. How did he know? Where's he coming from? So this is where I want to bring in the idea of Rav Soloveitchik. But to do that, we have to learn a Rambam, because Rav Soloveitchik's coming off this very important Rambam. Please go to the top of page 5. So in source 17, the Rambam says, Mitzvat asay, we have to read very carefully now. Mitzvat asay lahachrim shivat ha'amimim, there is a mitzvah to destroy the 7 nations. Shenema hechrem tacharimim, you have to wipe them out. V'kol sheba leyada echad mehem, if you come across one of these, Kanani, Chivi, Chiti, Yevusi, etc. V'lo hargo, and you didn't kill them. You've broken a mitzvah in the Torah. But then he says at the end, Ukfar avad zichram. But they don't exist anymore. So you're off the hook. You don't know who they are. They don't exist. The nation of Canaan does not exist anymore, so you can't do that. V'chein, and now we'll have to see what is this mitzvah v'chein. What does this word v'chein mean? Similarly, mitzvat asela abeid zechel Amalek. There is similarly a mitzvah to destroy Amalek. What do you mean similarly? They also don't exist, or they do exist. Shenema tzimcha zecha Amalek. Umitzvat ase liskor tamid ma'asav hara'im va'arevato. There is a mitzvah to always remember what Amalek did and how he tried to destroy us. Kedei la'orer evato, so that you don't calm down. You have to be fakocht about this, always. That's why we read it every year. So we remember this is something we need to fight. Shenema zechoret asher asa lachama Amalek. Bipi hashmua lamdu, and we learned in the oral law, zechor bepeh lo tishkach balev. Mention it in your mouth. This is why we learn Parsha Zachor. And in your mind, don't forget, she'asur lishkoach evato v'sinato. You can't forget the eva and the sinner that Amalek had against us. Okay. Why don't we know who the nations are? And do we know who Amalek is? Interestingly, what does he not say at the end of that? At the end of the first halacha, when he came to the Canaanim, he said, Kfar adva avad zichram. It's irrelevant because you don't know who they are. He never said that with Amalek. Why did he never say that? He should have said, V'kfar avad zichram. Or maybe he did say that by saying v'chein at the beginning. Depends on how you're going to read it. Now, in terms of why we don't know who they are, this is a very interesting halachic principle. If you look at the Radvaz in number 18, he comments immediately, when the Rambam writes that we don't know who they are, is lefi sheba Sancheriv ubilbel esa olam. Sancheriv messed up the world. Okay, so Sancheriv, as I'm sure you know, was the king of Assyria who came and exiled the 10 tribes. So when we read about that exile, he had a certain population policy, whereas later Koresh actually allowed people to come back to their ancestral lands and be loyal vassal states under the Persian Empire. Sancheriv in Aram, in Ashur rather, had a completely different policy. His idea was to take people from this part of the empire and take them over there, and from there and over here. How do we know? So have a look in number 19, and then I'll tell you an interesting story about that. Boba Yom. This is a Mishnah in Yadayim. Boba Yom ba Yehuda ger Ammoni. This guy Yehuda, an Ammonite ger, came, va'amod livnehim, and went to the Beis Din. Okay, they went to the Sanhedrin as an Ammonite ger. But Beis HaMedrash, he came to the Beis HaMedrash. Amalahem, so he said to them, Ma ani leva bakal. I have a shaila, eminent rabbis. Can I marry a Jewish woman? I'm an Ammonite ger. Okay. Amalor Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel answered him, Asur ata. I'm sorry, my friend. You cannot be a ger. You're not allowed to be a ger. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua, Muta ata. This is one of the debates between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua that blew up eventually into something which was very political. So Rabbi Yeshua said, no, I disagree. You can be a Jewish ger. You can get married. Amalei Rabbi Gamliel, so Rabbi Gamliel says to him, says, Hakos of Omer doesn't say, Lo yavo amoni o moavi bakal Hashem, gamdor asiri. The thing you can't have is a Moabite ger and an Ammonite ger. That's exactly what this fellow is. Now, of course, the whole story of Ruth is that the same with the women? Not the same with the women. So Amalor Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yeshua said to him, Ki Ammonim v'Moavim b'Makom. Do you know who the Ammonim are? Do you know who the Moavim are? You don't have a clue. Kvar ala Sancheriv melech Ashur ubilbel et kol Amot. This is in the Mishnah itself. The king, the Sancheriv completely switched around the whole world. And the Pasuk, he brings the Pasuk that in Yeshayahu puts into the mouth of Sancheriv the following comments, Va'asir gvulot amim. I have taken down the different gvulots, or I've made new gvulots for the nations. Va'atudotehem shuseti. I have plundered their treasures. Va'orid kabir yoshvim, and I've exiled vast populations. It's not clear how to translate those last words, but that's one of the translations. And in fact, as far as we're concerned, that's how we understand the presence of the Shomronim. That in the Tanakh, it says that one of the things that Sancheriv did is he took the Shomronim from somewhere in Kuta, which is somewhere in Iran, and he took them and he brought them to Shomron, because the people from Shomron, the 10 tribes from Shomron, he took and he put them somewhere else. This, of course, our narrative about the Shomronim, that they're basically people that were brought by Sancheriv and put into Shomron, and then they converted, or did they convert, etc. Now, you have to understand the Shomronim don't have the same narrative. Have you been to see the Shomronim? I'd recommend strongly you should go and visit the Shomronim. I had a very interesting visit with the Shomronim many years ago. I went there on Sukkot. I went there with a group. You need to get Livut Sahal, and it's not so posh. They live in a pretty, difficult neighborhood. And their narrative is that, yes, they said, yes, I know you think that we came with Sancheriv from somewhere else, but we think we were originally the tribe of Ephraim, and there was a big machlokas, and Eli HaKohen, it goes back that far, Jewish people remember machlokas for a long time. Eli HaKohen took off from Har Grizim and went down to Yerushalayim, and we stayed in Har Grizim, but we're really Jewish. The problem, of course, is that nobody else thinks they're Jewish apart from them. The Arabs should certainly know they're not Arab. They don't know if they're Jewish or not, but they're not Muslim, so they persecute them. In fact, the sukkah I went to was inside the house. So I was very interested in this because I thought, wow, this is like, the Shomronim claim to only have the written law but not the oral law. And I said to them, is this some like interpretation, like you have the sukkah inside the house? They said, no, we used to have the sukkah outside the house, but the Arabs threw stones at us, so now we have it inside the house. The Arabs threw stones at them, so they brought it inside the house. So I was a bit disappointed. I found, the Reform Shomronim, they brought the sukkah inside the house. So I said, okay, forget the sukkah. So we, talking through things. So I said to the guy there, very sweet guy, and his daughter was there as well, and the family. I said, you have separate plates for meat and for milk. So he looked at me, he said, Betach, ma ta choshev? Betach. So I said to him, why? Why would you have separate plates for meat and milk if you didn't have any kind of oral law? There is no hint anywhere in the Chumash that you have to have separate plates for meat and separate plates for milk. So he looked at me and he said, that's a good question. I'll have to ask the Kohen Gadol. They have a Kohen Gadol. So just a word of advice, if you're going to visit the Shomronim, try and visit the Kohen Gadol, because they'll have the answers to this. It was a very interesting exchange. That's another question for the Kohen Gadol. That's kind of clever. I never thought of that question. Okay, fine. Maybe there was some people that stayed around from Shevet Levi. There's a village called Shomronim. If you go up there, Route 60, past Somet Tapuach, and all the way through Chawara, you get there, and there's one side is Har Bracha, and the other side is Shomronim. And you just go to Shomronim, and they're very, very interesting. They have everything written in Ksav Ivri. If you remember, we had a whole shir on the original script, Ksav Ivri, and they have the mezuzot inscribed into the door, over the door, etc. It's very interesting. People go there to the Korban Pesach. They don't have the same calendar. There's a million interesting things about the Shomronim. Anyway, the point here is that we don't know who these people are. Okay? So we don't know who the Amalekim are. So why is there still a mitzvah to fight Amalek? So we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay. The Rambam, by the way, says, interestingly, that there is a mitzvah not only to fight Amalek, but to offer them peace in advance. This is also very interesting. Because if you say, well, we have a mitzvah to wipe out the whole nation of Amalek, so why are we offering them peace? And the Rambam says, no, you have to offer them peace. Which is very interesting. Let's look at the Rambam in number 20. Ein osim milchama im adam ba'olam. We never ever fight anybody ad shekorim lo shalom, until we first give them an option of peace. Echad milchemet reshut ve'echad milchemet mitzvah. And before you tell me, yeah, but surely not in a milchemet mitzvah. No, even in a milchemet mitzvah, you have to offer them an option of peace. Im lo hishlimu, if they won't make peace, or hishlimu v'lo kiblu sheva mitzvot, or they will make peace but they won't accept basic morality in the way that they live, the sheva mitzvot, then we have to fight, etc., etc. And he even understands, his position is, and I brought you the Kesef Mishnah, who says this clearly, the Rambam's position is, even with the 7 nations, even with Amalek, we have a mitzvah to offer them peace, before we make war. Number 21. Okay. All they need to do is accept the Sheva mitzvahs. It's a fascinating, this is a key Kesef Mishnah. He's saying that if they decide to accept the Sheva mitzvot, they are no longer Amalek. They are no longer the 7 nations. What we thought was a genealogical, hereditary, national race issue is clearly not. Because the minute they say, I'm happy to keep the Sheva mitzvahs. Oh, shkoyach. I'm happy to live with you as well. But I'm a Maleki. No, you're not. Not anymore. You used to be, but now you're not. Which is very, very interesting. The Avnei Neva also understands it this way, number 22. Avalim asu tshuva. If the Amalekim do tshuva, the kiblu sheva mitzvahs, and they just accept to be moral, non-Jews, that they don't murder and they don't steal, etc. Ha'ein ochsin masa avoseihim b'yadehem. We don't count anything against them. We don't have any issues with any particular group. V'shuv ein nenshim ba'avon avosam. Don't we have a principle in Judaism that people are not punished for the sins of their ancestors unless they continue to live in that way? So too with Amalek. We don't hold it against you that your grandparents were a Shaim. Do tshuva and keep the Sheva mitzvahs, which is actually very interesting. The Raavad, by the way, says maybe they need to do a little bit more. He says, Shevas ha'amim va'amalek, he disagrees with the Rambam. He says, Zeh shibush. I think this is a mistake. It's not enough that they keep the 7 mitzvot. Ela sheyochel lomar sheishlimu lekabel mitzvah. They have to become Jewish. If they're prepared to become Jewish, then everything will be fine, which is very interesting. It reminds me of a conversation I once heard from Rabbi Riskin, that when Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook was trying to convince him to bring in Efrat into the Gush Emunim movement in the 1970s, 80s rather. They founded Efrat. I can't remember which year Efrat was founded. Was it 82, 83, something like that? This was Tzvi Yehuda was towards the end of his life, and he came to Rav Riskin. I heard this from Rav Riskin, and said, I assume that you'll bring Efrat into Gush Emunim. So Rabbi Riskin, in classic Rabbi Riskin mode, said, I'm not so sure. He goes, why not? He says, but what about all the millions of Arabs that are living in Yehuda v'Shomron? I mean, I'm not so sure this whole Gush Emunim project is exactly, how are you going to deal with that, Rabbi? So he said to me, Rav Tzvi Yehuda took his hands in his hands and said, Al tidag, don't worry, Heim yityahadu. They're all going to become Jewish. Interesting. Okay? They all become Jewish. Who knows? Yes, I heard it from Rav Riskin. Okay, yes.
This Rambam mission is very non-intuitive. It seems to be we're working about genealogy.
But the problem is, we have a mitzvah to continue fighting them, and yet we also have a halachic principle that we don't know who they are, because the genealogies have all been messed up. And that's the core of the problem. If I have a mitzvah to continue fighting them, but on the other hand, you're telling me you don't know who they are, then how can that mitzvah apply? And the answer is, it's a mitzvah to fight, but not to fight this race. It's a mitzvah to fight people who are like this. That's the point. And that's how we understand Amalek. It's not genocidal, it's about what the people decide to be like. And actually, Tak, if you go over to page 6, you'll see that the Gemara in Gittin says, Mibnei, quite famous, Mibnei banav shel Haman, lamdu Torah b'bnei Brak. That the descendants of Haman ended up learning Torah in Bnei Brak. Why exactly they wanted to go to Ponevezh rather than the Mir is, I don't know exactly. But he clearly had descendants, and they clearly had something to add and to contribute. So now to Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik has a piece that he penned in 1956 when the Suez Crisis was brewing. So let's have a look at it together. Divine Providence is testing us once again via the crisis that has overtaken the land of Israel. Let it be clearly stated, the matter does not just affect the political future of the land of Israel. The designs of the Arabs are directed not just against the political sovereignty of the state of Israel, but against the very existence of the Yishuv in the land of Israel. They wish to destroy, heaven forbid, the entire community, both men and women, infant and suckling, ox and sheep. At a Mizrahi conference, I cited the view expressed by my father and master of Moshe Soloveitchik of blessed memory, that the proclamation the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation does not only translate into the communal exercise of waging war against a specific race, which we, in theory, yes, but we don't know who they are, but includes as well the obligation to rise up as a community against any people or group that, filled with maniacal hatred, directs its enmity against Knesset Yisrael. When a people emblazons on its banner, "Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel will be no more in remembrance," which is what we hear from certain nations of the world every day of the week, and they somehow or other are never accused of being genocidal, it becomes thereby Amalek. It becomes Amalek. In the 1930s and 40s, the Nazis with Hitler at their head filled this role. They were the Amalekites, the standard bearers of insane hatred and enmity during the era just past. Today, their place has been taken over by the mobs of Nasser and the Mufti. If we are silent now as well, I know not the verdict that will be issued against us by the God of justice. Meaning, I can't say what the consequences are for inaction. But, he says, I'll tell you this, do not rely on the quote-unquote liberal world sense of equity. Those same righteous liberals that were around 15 years ago, that was during the Shoah, and they looked with indifference upon the extermination of millions of people, they did not even lift a finger. If, heaven forbid, yet a second spectacle of blood were to take place before their very eyes, it is likely they would not even lose a night's sleep over it. Very powerful words. Very powerful. Rav Soloveitchik. And you can read the footnote on your own in 26. He goes into it in more detail, and he says that, again, on an individual level, we don't know who the Amalekim are, but the mantle of Amalek, if you like, is taken over by any nation of this kind. So let's just spend a few minutes towards the end of the shir looking at a very interesting idea. Some moral and ethical approaches. And here I want to actually bring in Rabbi Lam, Rabbi Sachs, and also again Rav Lichtenstein. So Rabbi Lam raises this. He has a very important book. Rabbi Lam also has an essay on Amalek, which is very much worth reading. And he has a book called Faith and Doubt, which is an excellent book and really recommend it very strongly. And he here talks about this issue. There are two elements of moral concern. One is Amalek, whereby the descendants of Amalek are forever condemned to death, apparently without regard to their own conduct, which we've seen is not the case, from the Rambam at least. The Torah's explanation implies a genetic defect in the Amalekites, and the other is the 7 nations. And first of all, he brings you the Chazon Ish. And the Chazon Ish basically says, okay, I don't know why you're asking questions. If God says this is correct, then that's the ethical thing to do. The Word of God is all you need. The Word of God equals ethics. Okay? That's one approach. And Rabbi Lam disagrees respectfully with that. And he says that there is an ethic which is beyond just individual mitzvot, which is made up of the Torah as a whole. And you can't just bring in your ethic from some foreign source, but the Torah of a whole is trying to bring you to an ethical and moral sensibility. And this is a very important point. For example, there are meta mitzvot in the Torah. Kadoshim tihiyu. You have to be kadosh. Va'asita va'yashav. You have to do the right thing. These are macro mitzvahs, mega mitzvahs, that if you look in the Ramban on each of these, having picked up the sensitivities of how to keep all of the individual mitzvot, you're meant to build up a picture of what it means to be an ethical, moral, sensitized Jew, and that will inform you on how to make broader ethical and moral decisions. It's the Torah which informs you, but not from the micro mitzvah, but from the macro ethical understanding. So Rabbi Lam has that approach. Again, he says the Chazon Ish not. Rabbi Sachs comes up with, I think, a brilliant thing. And in case you've been wondering, when would UThiPro come in? Here it is, okay? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, but have a look in number 28. In Judaism, the UThiPro dilemma does not exist. What's the UThiPro dilemma? So it's a famous Greek dilemma. Is the right because the gods said it's right? Or is it right, and therefore, because it's right, that's what the gods said to do? Which is it? Is it right because God said it? Or is it right, and therefore God told us to do the right thing? Is it wrong to murder people, and therefore God said, you know something? You wouldn't want to do that. Don't murder people. But we knew already before the mitzvah that it was wrong. Or is it only wrong because God says, and therefore murder here is wrong, but over here is fine?
Everything came from God.
That's not true. Avram Avinu didn't have a revealed system of Torah. He didn't have a Matan Torah. He didn't have a Har Sinai. He had to work it out for himself. He didn't have mitzvot. It had to be worked out intuitively. And so maybe your answer actually is Rabbi Sachs' answer. When you say everything, look in number 28, actually, because I think you might have put your finger on it. In Judaism, the UThiPro dilemma does not exist. God commands the good because it is good. Without this assumption, Abraham's challenge over the fate of Sodom, shall the judge of the earth not do justice, would be incomprehensible. God and humans are equally answerable to the claims of justice. But the good is what God commands because God, the lawgiver, is also God, the creator and the redeemer. It's a very important point. Morality mirrors the deep structure of the universe that God made and called good. Plato's challenge arises because the Greek gods were not creators. Matter was eternal. The gods had no special authority, except for the fact that they were held to be powerful. Plato was therefore correct to challenge the popular cults of his day by in effect drawing a principal distinction between might and right. The gods may be strong, but that is no reason to invest them with moral authority. For the Bible, however, God who teaches us how to act in the world is also the maker of the world in which we act, which is maybe the point that you just made. This means that in monotheism, morality means going with, not against the grain of the cosmos and history. It's very important. Rabbi Sachs talks about this a lot. Monotheism doesn't just mean having one God, as opposed to 3 or 10 or 25. Monotheism means that you don't see any dichotomy between science and religion, between the world and ethics and halacha and mitzvot. It's all part of the same system. God himself empowers his prophets to challenge kings, even himself, in the name of justice and mercy. To be sure, there are occasions, most famously the binding of Isaac, in which God seems to demand pure obedience. But this itself suggests that the story may be more subtle than it seems. Taken as a whole, Judaism embodies divine faith in the moral capacity and literacy of humankind. We could go on and read Rabbi Sachs forever, but he's making a really important point, that whenever we talk about morality, we don't see a dilemma. The morality of the Torah should accord with the morality that we get from understanding the world as a whole, not just from other non-Jewish systems, but from a broader understanding of the world. And Rabbi Lichtenstein picks up on this. And I'm not going to read, obviously, the whole of number 7, because you can read it in your own time. But Rav Lichtenstein, and for that matter, by the way, Rav Amital, sometimes made themselves a little bit unpopular with the religious right. If you remember back to the Lebanon War, I was a little kid during the Lebanon War, so I don't remember the specifics, but Rav Lichtenstein, after Sabra and Shatila, came out and wrote some quite unpopular things and challenged whether the morality of how Begin had conducted the war was correct. Rav Amital also. And in this piece, he rehearses the arguments between him and the other religious leaders on the quotes-unquote right in the religious Zionist world, and he goes through that. You can read Rav Lichtenstein, his balance and his approach on the one hand, on the other hand. Let me just leave you with 2 ideas, and with this we'll finish, and more Hasidic ideas. So on the bottom of page 8, I brought you a piece from the Kedushas Levi. Rav Levi Yitzchak of Bedichev says a very beautiful idea, which is, yes, as individuals, we don't have a mitzvah to destroy Amalekim, because we don't know who they are. And therefore, as a nation, there's this idea, and Amalek is more a kind of concept of whoever takes on the mantle of Amalek. But I'll tell you where you'll find Amalek, he says. You'll find it inside every single person. Everyone is a world in and of themselves. It's a very 19th century idea. And Amalek is a force in the world, meaning it's a force within you, within me. And we have a mitzvah, Timcha et Zech Amalek, to destroy the Amalek within us, which is weakening us. And this is where he says, Refidim is Raf Yadayim. There's something inside us which is undermining our connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we have to just destroy that. And he's not denying the mitzvah of Amalek, but he's saying that on a regular daily basis, everybody is engaged in a mitzvah in themselves of Timcha et Zech Amalek, which is maybe one of the reasons why some people have a minhag to say it every morning, to remember it, that it's not just about Purim, but it's about perfecting themselves insofar as they can. And the last thing, let's give the last word to the Sfat Emet, where the Sfat Emet says that one of the important things about Amalek is to understand that Amalek is singled out as a nation which will never ultimately have any redeeming features. But that tells you that every other nation in the world will. And therefore he says that we need to try and understand that Amalek is different from everyone else, and everyone else, the Americans, the Germans, whoever, even the French, maybe even the French, have features within them that will ultimately come to Kedusha. And he brings the examples at the end where he talks about the Psukim for Mashiach, that all nations will come to God, except Amalek. Amalek will be wiped out. But that, again, spurs us on to not just see a critique of the non-Jewish world, but find ways to identify the Kedusha inherent in other nations as well, which may not be manifest yet, but will one day be manifest. Okay, right now the United Nations is a mess, but the concept is a concept which we believe in. And we just have to make it work. Because at the end of the day, they realize this one themselves. They wrote psukim from Yeshayahu on First Avenue there, which are understanding that this is a messianic ideal, and the road to Mashiach is bumpy, and we'll work it out Be'ezrat Hashem. But hopefully that will give us some understandings of Amalek, and we'll go into Parshas Zohar a little bit more understanding of that. So I wish you all a good week. Next week I want to give the last in the series, and then we'll move on to other things, and Be'ezrat Hashem we'll move forward.